The alarm came at midnight. Admiral Vorath was sleeping in his quarters when the sound pulled him from his dreams. He had not heard this particular alarm in over 50 years. It was the sound that meant something unknown had entered Empire space, something that the sensors could not identify. He put on his uniform and walked quickly to the command center. His boots made sharp sounds against the metal floor. Around him, soldiers and officers were running. Everyone looked confused. Everyone looked scared. The command center was a large round room filled with screens and holographic displays. Blue light filled the space. Officers sat at their stations, their fingers moving fast over control panels. In the center of the room, a massive holographic map showed the entire galaxy. Millions of stars floated in the air like tiny diamonds. But everyone was looking at one spot, Sector 17, the dead zone. Vorath walked to the main display. His second-in-command, a tall creature named Overseer Yelthin, was already there. Yelthin had 4 eyes and gray skin. Right now, all 4 of his eyes were wide open with shock. "Report," Vorath said. His voice was calm, but inside he felt something cold growing in his chest. "We detected an object, Admiral," Yelthin said. 43 minutes ago. It appeared at the edge of Sector 17 and moved across 3 monitoring stations before we lost it." "What kind of object? A ship? An asteroid?" "We do not know, Admiral. That is the problem." Vorath looked at the data on the screen. The numbers made no sense to him at first. Then he understood, and the cold feeling in his chest became ice. "This speed reading must be wrong," he said. "We checked it 7 times, Admiral. The reading is correct. The object was moving at 0.7 light speed. In real space, without a warp corridor." "Yes, Admiral, no warp signature, no energy field, just raw speed through normal space." Vorath was silent for a long moment. He had served the galactic sovereignty for 200 years. He had seen wars and disasters and things that would make other beings go mad. But he had never seen anything like this. The sovereignty controlled the galaxy. They had ruled for 3,000 years. In all that time, they had recorded every species, every ship, every technology. Nothing moved through their space without identification. Nothing traveled without leaving a signal. And nothing, absolutely nothing, moved at 0.7 light speed without using a warp corridor. Warp corridors were the only way to travel fast. They bent space itself, creating shortcuts between distant points. Every civilized species used them. Every ship needed them. Without warp, traveling between stars would take years, sometimes decades, sometimes centuries. Yet this object had done exactly that. It had moved at impossible speed through normal space, as if the laws of physics meant nothing to it. "Where did it come from?" Vorath asked. Yelthin pointed at the map. "From here, Admiral, the deep void beyond Sector 17. There is nothing there. No stars, no planets, no stations. Just empty space for 10,000 light-years in every direction." "And where did it go?" "We lost tracking after it passed the 3rd monitoring station. It was simply too fast. By the time our sensors adjusted, it was gone." Vorath stared at the empty point on the map where the object had vanished. His mind was racing. In 3,000 years, the sovereignty had never encountered anything they could not explain. They had defeated every enemy. They had absorbed every species. They had become the unquestioned rulers of the galaxy. But now something was out there, something unknown, something that could move faster than anything they had ever built. "Did it send any signal?" Vorath asked. "Any communication, any identification code?" "No, Admiral, nothing. No ID beacon, no signal, no communication of any kind. It was completely silent." "So we have an object with no identification, no signal, and no known origin, moving at speeds that should be impossible." "That is correct, Admiral." The room was very quiet. Every officer was listening. Every soldier was watching. They were all waiting for Vorath to tell them what to do. They were all waiting for him to make sense of this impossible thing. But Vorath did not know what to say. For the first time in his long life, he was facing something he did not understand. "Send word to the High Council," he finally said. "Tell them what we have seen, and increase sensor sensitivity across all sectors. If this object appears again, I want to know immediately." "Yes, Admiral. And what should we tell the Council about what the object is?" Vorath was silent for a moment. Then he spoke, and his voice was heavy with uncertainty. "Tell them we do not know. Tell them that for the first time in 3,000 years, the sovereignty has encountered something we cannot identify or explain. And tell them that whatever this thing is, it is faster than anything we have ever seen." The message was sent. Across the galaxy, on 100 different worlds, the leaders of the sovereignty read the report and felt the same cold fear that Vorath had felt. Something was out there, something unknown, and it was moving through their space like a ghost. For the next several days, Vorath barely slept. He spent his time in the command center, watching the sensors, waiting for the object to appear again. His officers worked in shifts, but he refused to leave. He ate his meals at his station. He read every report, studied every data point, ran every possible analysis. Nothing made sense. The object had no engine signature that matched any known technology. Its hull material could not be determined from the sensor readings. Its size was small, much smaller than any sovereignty warship, and its speed was simply impossible. Vorath began to have dark thoughts. He thought about the old stories, the myths that his people had told before they became rulers of the galaxy. Stories about beings that existed before the stars. Stories about creatures that lived in the spaces between galaxies, in the great empty voids where no light ever shone. He had always believed those stories were just fairy tales, nonsense told to frighten children. But now, looking at the data on his screen, he was not so sure. What if the stories were true? What if something ancient and powerful was waking up? What if the sovereignty, for all their strength and technology, was about to face something they could not defeat? Vorath pushed these thoughts away. He was a military commander, not a storyteller. He dealt in facts, not myths. And the fact was simple. They had detected an unknown object and they needed to find out what it was. He gave the order to double the patrols in Sector 17. He sent scout ships to the deep void, searching for any sign of where the object had come from. He requested additional resources from the High Council, and they granted every request without question. The entire sovereignty was now focused on one goal: finding the impossible object and discovering its secrets. But the object did not appear again. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months. The sensors remained quiet. The patrols found nothing. The void remained empty and silent. Some officers began to relax. Some began to say that the object had been a mistake, a glitch in the sensors, a trick of light and radiation. Some began to laugh about the panic they had felt. But Vorath did not relax, and Vorath did not laugh. He stood at his station, watching the stars on the holographic map, and he waited. He knew, deep in his bones, that the object was still out there. He knew it would appear again. And when it did, he would be ready. 3 months passed in silence. The sovereignty continued its daily work. Ships moved through warp corridors. Trade flowed between worlds. Life went on as it always had. But in the shadows, the search continued. Admiral Vorath had not forgotten. Every day he checked the sensor reports. Every night he studied the data from that first sighting. He had memorized every detail, every number, every reading. The object haunted his dreams. Then, on a quiet morning in the 4th month, the alarm sounded again. Vorath was in his quarters when he heard it. He ran to the command center faster than he had ever run before. His hearts were pounding in his chest. His hands were shaking. "Where?" he demanded as he burst through the door. Sector 44, Admiral, an officer reported. 3 minutes ago, same profile as before, no ID, no signal, moving at .7 light speed through normal space. That is on the other side of the Empire, Vorath said. How did it get there so fast? We do not know, Admiral, but the readings are identical. It is the same object. Vorath stared at the map. Sector 17 was in the outer regions of the Empire. Sector 44 was deep in the core. The distance between them was enormous. Even using the fastest warp corridors, it would take weeks to travel that far. But the object had done it in 3 months, without warp, through normal space. Track it, Vorath ordered. Do not lose it this time. The officers worked frantically. Sensors across dozens of stations focused on the object. Data poured in from every direction, but it was no use. The object moved too fast. Within seconds, it had passed through the sensor range and vanished into the darkness once more. Vorath slammed his fist against the console. The metal dented under his strength. This is impossible, he growled. Nothing can move like that, nothing. But the data did not lie. The object was real, and it was playing with them. Over the next 2 months, the object appeared 6 more times. Each appearance was in a different sector. Each time, it moved at the same impossible speed. Each time, it vanished before they could intercept it. The High Council grew worried. Emergency meetings were held in secret. The greatest scientists of the sovereignty studied the data, but none of them could explain what they were seeing. Some said it was a natural phenomenon, a trick of space and time. Others said it was ancient technology, something from before the Empire existed. A few whispered darker theories. They spoke of the Wanderers, beings from the old myths who existed before the first stars were born. They said the Wanderers could move through space without ships, could bend reality with their thoughts, could destroy entire civilizations with a single word. These speakers were told to be silent. The sovereignty did not believe in myths. The sovereignty believed in power and control and order. But the fear remained. It spread through the ranks like a disease. Soldiers began to look over their shoulders. Officers began to have nightmares. The entire empire was slowly being poisoned by uncertainty. Then came the breakthrough. Lieutenant Keth was a young officer, barely 30 years old. He commanded a small scout ship in the Veltris Nebula, a cloud of gas and dust at the edge of civilized space. His job was simple: watch the borders and report anything unusual. On the night of the breakthrough, Keth was bored. His ship drifted through the nebula, sensors scanning the empty space around him. Nothing ever happened in the Veltris Nebula. Nothing ever changed. Then his sensor board lit up. Keth sat up straight in his chair. His eyes went wide. The readings were unmistakable. The object was here. The ghost that had been haunting the Empire for months was right in front of him. For a moment, Keth could not move. Fear held him frozen. The object was moving at incredible speed, cutting through the nebula like a knife through water. In seconds, it would be gone. But Keth was a good officer. He had trained for this moment. His hands moved without thinking, activating the emergency recording system and focusing every sensor on the object. The object passed his ship at a distance of only a few thousand kilometers. It was the closest any sovereignty vessel had ever been to the ghost, and for 3 precious seconds, Keth's sensors captured detailed data. Then the object was gone, vanishing into the void as it always did. Keth sat in silence for a long moment. His hands were shaking, his hearts were racing, but he had done it. He had captured data that no one else had been able to capture. He sent the recording to Admiral Vorath immediately. Vorath received the data at midnight. He was in his quarters trying to sleep when the message arrived. He opened it and began to read. At first, he did not understand what he was seeing. The numbers made no sense. The readings seemed wrong. But as he studied the data more carefully, the truth began to emerge. And the truth was more shocking than anything he had imagined. The object was not a natural phenomenon. It was not an asteroid or a comet or a trick of light. It was a ship, a small, crude ship built from simple metals and basic materials. But that was not the most shocking part. The most shocking part was the life signs. There were two of them, two biological creatures inside the ship, alive, breathing, real. Voreth read the data 3 times to make sure he was not making a mistake, but the readings were clear. Whatever was piloting this impossible ship, whatever had been haunting the Empire for months, it was alive. He called an emergency meeting of the High Council. They gathered within hours. The most powerful beings in the galaxy sat in a dark room looking at the data on the screen. No one spoke, no one breathed. The silence was heavy and thick. Finally, Counselor Dreth spoke. He was an old creature, wise and careful, who had served on the council for over 500 years. "Are we certain this data is accurate?" he asked. "Lieutenant Keth is a reliable officer," Voreth replied. "His sensors were functioning properly. The data is real." "Then we are dealing with an unknown species," Dreth said. "A species that can travel at impossible speeds without warp technology. A species that has been watching us, testing us, moving through our space without permission." "It appears so, Counselor." The council members looked at each other. Fear was visible in their eyes. For 3,000 years, they had believed they knew everything about the galaxy. They had believed they were the masters of all they surveyed. Now they knew they were wrong. "We must find them," Dreth said. "We must learn who they are and where they come from. We must discover the secret of their technology." "And if they are hostile?" another counselor asked. Dreth was silent for a moment. Then he spoke and his voice was cold. "Then we will do what we have always done. We will destroy them." The council gave Voreth new orders. He was to use every resource available to track the object. He was to capture it if possible, destroy it if necessary. He was to learn the truth about these unknown beings, whatever the cost. Voreth accepted the orders without question. But as he left the council chamber, he felt something strange in his chest. It was not fear exactly. It was something deeper, something older. It was the feeling that the universe was much larger and much stranger than he had ever believed. It was the feeling that everything he knew was about to change. He returned to his command center and began to plan. Somewhere out there, in the vast darkness between stars, 2 unknown creatures were moving through space at impossible speed. And Voreth was determined to find them. The trap took 6 weeks to build. Admiral Voreth studied every piece of data they had collected. He analyzed every sighting, every sensor reading, every possible trajectory. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. The object was not moving randomly. It was following a path, a route that curved through the galaxy in a great arc. And that arc would soon pass through the hollow expanse. The hollow expanse was a region of space filled with gravity wells. Old stars had died there long ago, leaving behind dense cores that pulled at everything around them. Ships avoided the area because navigation was difficult. The gravity wells made warp travel impossible and normal travel dangerous. But Voreth saw an opportunity. If the object had to pass through the hollow expanse, it would have to slow down. The gravity wells would force it to adjust its course, and in that moment of adjustment they could catch it. He assembled the largest fleet the sovereignty had ever gathered in one place. 12 capital ships, each one capable of destroying a planet. 50 smaller vessels for support. 3,000 soldiers ready for boarding action. They waited in the darkness of the hollow expanse, their systems powered down, their signals silenced. They waited for the ghost to appear. Voreth stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the empty space on the viewscreen. His officers worked quietly at their stations. No one spoke. The tension was so thick it was hard to breathe. Days passed, then weeks. Some officers began to doubt. Some began to whisper that the object would not come, that Voreth's calculations were wrong, that they were wasting time and resources on a fool's mission. But Voreth did not doubt. He knew the object would come. He could feel it in his bones. On the 32nd day, the sensors detected movement at the edge of the expanse. "Contact," an officer reported, his voice shaking. "Same profile as before, it is the object." "All ships prepare for intercept," Voreth commanded. "Activate the energy tethers. Do not let it escape." The Sovereignty ships came to life. Engines powered up. Weapons systems activated. The energy tethers, special devices designed to lock onto fast-moving objects, began to charge. The object entered the hollow expanse at incredible speed, but as Voreth had predicted, it began to slow. The gravity wells were pulling at it, forcing it to change course. For the first time, the ghost was vulnerable. "Now," Voreth said. 12 capital ships fired their energy tethers at once. Beams of blue light shot across space, reaching for the object like giant hands. The object tried to dodge, tried to accelerate away, but there were too many tethers from too many directions. One by one, the beams connected. The object jerked to a stop, caught in a web of energy that held it firmly in place. "We have it," an officer said, his voice filled with wonder. "Admiral, we have it." Voreth allowed himself a small smile. After months of chasing shadows, they had finally caught the ghost. "Bring it to the flagship," he ordered, "and prepare a boarding team. I want to see what is inside." The captured ship was brought into the main hangar of Voreth's flagship. Hundreds of soldiers surrounded it, weapons raised and ready. Scientists stood behind them with scanning equipment. Everyone was tense. Everyone was afraid. Voreth walked through the crowd and stood in front of the captured ship. For the first time, he could see it clearly. It was small, much smaller than he had expected. The hull was made of simple metal, scarred and dented from countless impacts. There was no elegant design, no smooth curves, no sign of advanced technology. It looked crude, primitive, like something a child might build. But the most striking thing was the writing on the side. Strange symbols, unlike any language in the Sovereignty database. Voreth had the translation computers analyze them, but they could make no sense of the words. The symbols read, Korea Space Agency, Genesis VII. Below that, pilot, Captain Haniso. And below that, co-pilot, Dr. Kimyuna. Names, they were names, the names of the creatures inside. "Open the airlock," Voreth commanded. The soldiers moved forward. They attached devices to the crude airlock mechanism and began to override the controls. Everyone held their breath. The airlock hissed open. For a moment, nothing happened. Then two figures stepped out into the light. Voreth had seen many species in his long life. He had seen creatures with scales and feathers and tentacles. He had seen beings of pure energy and beings made of living metal. He had thought nothing could surprise him anymore. But these beings were unlike anything he had ever seen. They were small, soft. Their skin was smooth and pale, with no scales or armor of any kind. They had 2 arms, 2 legs, and a single head with 2 forward-facing eyes. They wore thin suits that covered their bodies, but the suits looked fragile and weak. Everything about them looked fragile and weak. Yet they stood straight. They looked at the hundreds of soldiers surrounding them without fear. Their eyes moved calmly across the room, taking in every detail. The male was slightly taller. His face was calm and steady. He raised one hand in a gesture that seemed to be a greeting. The female was smaller, but her eyes were sharp and intelligent. She held a small device in her hands, and she pressed a button on it. The device spoke in broken sovereignty common tongue. "We come in peace," it said. "We are humans from a planet called Earth." The words echoed through the hangar. Humans, Earth, names that no one in the Sovereignty had ever heard before. Voreth stepped forward. He was much larger than these creatures. He could crush them with one hand, but something about them made him cautious. "I am Admiral Vorath of the Galactic Sovereignty," he said. "You are in our space without permission. You have been evading our forces for months. Explain yourselves." The male, Hansu, listened as the translation device processed Vorath's words. Then he spoke, and his voice was calm and measured. "We did not know this was your space," he said through the device. "We did not know anyone lived here. We have been traveling for a very long time. Where did you come from? What is this Earth you speak of?" Hansu looked at his companion, Kim Yuna. Something passed between them, a silent communication that Vorath could not read. Then Hansu turned back to the Admiral. "Earth is our home world," he said. "It is very far from here, beyond the region you call the Maw." A murmur went through the crowd. The Maw was a region of gravitational chaos that bordered the far edge of sovereignty space. No ship had ever crossed it. No ship could cross it. The gravity storms and space distortions made travel impossible. "You crossed the Maw?" Vorath demanded. "Yes," Hansu said simply. "How? It is impassable. Our best ships cannot navigate those conditions." Hansu seemed confused by the question. He spoke with Yuna in their strange language, then turned back to Vorath. "We went through it," he said. "It was difficult, it took many years, but we went through it." Vorath felt something cold in his chest. Years. They had spent years crossing a region that the sovereignty considered impossible. What kind of beings were these? "Your ship," Vorath said, pointing at the crude vessel behind them. "How does it move so fast? What technology powers it?" Hansu looked back at the ship. A small smile appeared on his face. It was the smile of someone remembering a long journey. "It is not special technology," he said. "The engine burns fuel. The fuel pushes the ship. The ship moves faster and faster." "That is impossible. No conventional engine can achieve 0.7 light speed." "It can if you never stop," Hansu said. Vorath stared at him. The words did not make sense. Every ship needed to stop. Every ship needed to rest. Engines needed maintenance. Crews needed supplies. The idea of never stopping was absurd. But the human just looked at him with calm, steady eyes. And in those eyes, Vorath saw something that made his blood run cold. He saw the truth. "How long?" Vorath asked quietly. "How long have you been traveling?" Hansu was silent for a moment. Then he spoke and his voice was soft. 47 years, he said. The hangar went completely silent. No one moved, no one breathed. 47 years. These two fragile creatures had been traveling through the void of space for 47 years, in a metal box, with no warp drive, with nothing but a crude engine and their own will to survive. Vorath looked at the humans with new eyes. He saw the lines on their faces, the gray in their hair, the weariness in their bodies. They had spent almost half a century in that tiny ship. They had endured loneliness and darkness and the endless emptiness of space. And they had survived. For the first time in his life, Admiral Vorath felt something he had never felt before. He felt respect and fear, deep primal fear. Because if these humans could endure 47 years in the void, what else could they endure? What else could they survive? What else would they refuse to give up on? The interrogation lasted for many days. Vorath placed the humans in a secure room on his flagship. It was not a prison cell, but it was not comfortable either. Guards stood outside the door at all times. Cameras watched every movement. Scientists monitored every breath, every heartbeat, every biological function. Vorath visited them personally every day. He asked questions, many questions, and with each answer his fear grew deeper. The humans told him about Earth. It was a small planet, they said, orbiting a single yellow star. It had water and land and air. It was home to billions of humans, all living together in nations and cities. "Billions?" Vorath asked. "You have billions of your species on one planet." Yes, Yuna answered. She was the scientist of the two and she did most of the explaining. Earth is crowded. That is one reason we started exploring space. And your technology, your ships, your weapons. Yuna smiled sadly. We have nothing like what you have. We cannot travel faster than light. We cannot bend space. Our weapons are primitive compared to yours. We are not advanced. Voreth did not understand. If humans were so primitive, how had they built a ship that moved so fast? How had they crossed the impossible maw? How had they done things that the mighty sovereignty could not do? He asked these questions, and Yuna's answer made him sit in silence for a long time. We did not do anything special, she said. We just did not stop. She explained their journey. Genesis VII had launched from Earth 47 years ago. It was a test mission, an experiment to see if humans could travel between stars. The ship carried a nuclear pulse engine, a simple but powerful device that pushed the ship forward with tiny explosions. The engine was not fast. At first it barely moved the ship at all, but it never stopped burning. Day after day, year after year, the engine pushed, and slowly, very slowly, the ship got faster. It is basic physics, Yuna said. If you keep pushing something, it keeps accelerating. There is no friction in space, no air resistance. If you push long enough, you can reach any speed. But the time, Voreth said, 47 years, how did you survive? Hansu answered this question. He had been quiet during most of the interrogation, letting Yuna do the talking. But now he spoke, and his voice was heavy with memory. It was hard, he said, harder than anything we had ever done. The first few years were the worst. We missed Earth. We missed our families. We missed the sun and the wind and the smell of rain. There were days when we wanted to give up, days when the darkness felt like it would swallow us whole. He paused and his eyes grew distant. But we kept going. We talked to each other. We told stories. We remembered why we had left. We had promised to reach the stars and we refused to break that promise. You could have turned back, Voreth said. No, Hansu said firmly. We could not. By the time we wanted to give up, we had already traveled too far. Going back would take as long as going forward. There was no escape. The only way out was through. Voreth studied the human's face. He saw no anger there, no resentment, only acceptance. These creatures had trapped themselves in a one-way journey into the unknown, and they had simply accepted it. The sovereignty had psychological profiles of every known species. They knew the breaking points, the limits of endurance, the boundaries of sanity. No species they had ever encountered could survive more than a few months in isolation without suffering severe mental damage. But these humans had endured 47 years. Your minds, Voreth said. How did you stay sane? Our scientists say isolation should have destroyed you within the first year. Yuna and Hansu looked at each other. Again, Voreth saw that silent communication, that deep connection between them. Humans are social creatures, Yuna said. We need each other, that is true, but we also have something that helps us survive. We call it hope. Hope. The belief that things will get better, the belief that our suffering has meaning, the belief that tomorrow will be different from today, she smiled. It is not logical, it is not rational, but it is powerful. It kept us alive when everything else said we should die. Voreth thought about this. The sovereignty did not believe in hope. They believed in power and control. They shaped the future through strength, not through belief. Hope was a weakness, a delusion that less advanced species clung to. But looking at these two humans, survivors of an impossible journey, he was not so sure anymore. He asked more questions. He learned that Earth had sent other ships before Genesis VII, all of which had failed. He learned that Hansu and Yuna had volunteered for the mission knowing they might never return. He learned that they had left behind families, friends, entire lives, all for the chance to touch the stars. Why, Voreth asked, why would you sacrifice everything for this? Hansu thought for a long moment before answering. Because we had to know, he said. We looked up at the night sky and saw the stars, and we had to know what was out there. We had to know if we were alone. It is in our nature. Humans cannot see a mountain without wanting to climb it. We cannot see an ocean without wanting to cross it. We cannot see the stars without wanting to reach them. Even if it means death. Even then, our species has a saying, it is better to try and fail than to never try at all. Vorath was silent. In his culture, failure was shameful. Failure was weakness. The sovereignty did not attempt things unless success was certain. They did not take risks. They did not leap into the unknown. But humans did. Humans threw themselves at impossible challenges again and again, accepting failure after failure, driven by nothing but the stubborn belief that someday they would succeed. It was madness, it was foolishness. And it was terrifying. Vorath reported his findings to the High Council. He told them everything the humans had said. He showed them the data from the ship's computers, which the scientists had managed to access. He explained the technology, the journey, the psychology. The council listened in silence. When Vorath finished, Counselor Dreth spoke first. So they are not advanced, he said. They have no weapons that threaten us. No technology that surpasses ours. They are simply stubborn. That is correct, Counselor. Then why do you seem afraid, Admiral? Vorath hesitated. He was not sure how to explain what he felt. He was not sure he understood it himself. Because of what their stubbornness means, he finally said. These humans crossed the impossible maw. They spent 47 years in a metal box. They did things that no species in our records has ever done, and they did it with nothing but willpower. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. We have ruled this galaxy for 3,000 years because we are powerful, our ships are fast, our weapons are strong. No one can match us in battle, but these humans do not fight battles. They do not try to match our strength. They simply endure. They simply refuse to give up. And that concerns you. Yes, Counselor, because if they can cross the maw, what else can they cross? If they can survive 47 years in the void, what else can they survive? If they can endure anything we throw at them, how do we defeat them? The council was silent. The question hung in the air like a dark cloud. Finally, Dreth spoke again. There is a simple answer to that question, Admiral. We do not let more of them come. We destroy these two humans and their ship. We erase all evidence of their existence, and we ensure that no human ever reaches our space again. Several council members nodded in agreement. It was the safe option, the controlled option, the option that maintained the sovereignty's power and security. But Vorath felt something heavy in his chest, something wrong. Is that the council's decision? He asked. It is, Dreth said. The humans will be eliminated. The matter will be closed. Vorath bowed his head, as the council commands. He left the chamber and returned to his ship. The decision had been made. The humans would die. But as he walked through the corridors of his flagship, Vorath could not shake the feeling that this was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The execution was scheduled for the following morning. Vorath received the orders directly from the High Council. The humans were to be eliminated. Their ship was to be destroyed. All records of the encounter were to be sealed. The ghost that had haunted the Empire would finally be erased. Vorath did not sleep that night. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the two creatures in the holding room. They had traveled 47 years to reach this place. They had survived the impossible. And now they would die, alone and forgotten, millions of light years from their home. It seemed wrong, it seemed wasteful. But the council had spoken, and Vorath was a soldier. He followed orders. In the morning, he went to the holding room to inform the humans of their fate. He expected fear. He expected anger. He expected begging and pleading and tears. But when he entered the room, Han Su and Yuna were sitting calmly at the table. They looked up at him with quiet eyes. There was no fear in their faces. "You know why I am here," Voreth said. "Yes," Han Su replied. "Your council has decided to kill us." "How do you know this?" Han Su smiled slightly. "We have been prisoners before, Admiral. We know how empires work. When they cannot control something, they destroy it." Voreth felt a strange twist in his chest. These creatures were about to die, and they were smiling. They were making observations about politics. They were completely at peace. "Do you have any last requests?" Voreth asked. Han Su and Yuna looked at each other. That silent communication again. Then Yuna turned to Voreth. "We would like to see our ship one more time," she said. "Before the end. We spent 47 years in that ship. It feels wrong to die without saying goodbye." Voreth considered the request. It was unusual, it was sentimental, but it was also harmless. The ship had been thoroughly searched. There was nothing dangerous inside. "Very well," he said. "You may see your ship." Guards escorted the humans to the hangar. Voreth followed. He was not sure why he wanted to witness this moment. Perhaps he was curious. Perhaps he felt he owed them something. The ship looked even smaller than before. Genesis VII sat in the middle of the hangar, surrounded by soldiers and scientists. Its hull was dented and scorched. Its markings were faded. It looked like a relic, a museum piece, something that belonged in history. But to the humans, it was home. Han Su walked up to the ship and placed his hand on the hull. His fingers traced the metal gently, like a father touching his child. Yuna stood beside him, her eyes wet with tears. 47 years, Han Su said softly. "This ship carried us through the darkness. It kept us alive when we should have died. It brought us to the stars." "And now it ends here," Voreth said. "Far from your world, far from your people." Han Su turned to face him. His eyes were calm and steady. "No, Admiral," he said. "It does not end here." Voreth frowned. "What do you mean?" Han Su stepped closer to the ship. His hand found a small panel on the hull, hidden among the dents and scratches. He pressed it. Inside the ship, something beeped. The guards raised their weapons. Voreth stepped forward, ready to stop whatever was happening, but Han Su just stood there, smiling. "What did you do?" Voreth demanded. "I sent a message," Han Su said. "The ship's communication system has been charging since we arrived. Solar energy from your hangar lights. Very slow, very quiet, but enough power for one transmission." Voreth felt ice in his veins. "What message? To whom?" "To Earth," Han Su said. "I told them we made it. I told them we found life among the stars. I told them to come find us." The guards looked at Voreth for orders, but Voreth did not move. He was frozen, staring at the human with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "The transmission was sent hours ago," Han Su continued. "It is already racing through space at the speed of light. You cannot stop it. You cannot catch it. In a few decades it will reach Earth, and when it does, more humans will come." "We will destroy them," Voreth said, "just as we will destroy you." "Perhaps," Han Su said. "But how many? How many ships will you destroy? How many humans will you kill? We are billions, Admiral, and we do not give up." Yuna stepped forward. Her voice was soft, but it carried through the silent hangar. "You have ruled this galaxy for 3,000 years," she said. "You have never faced a challenge you could not defeat, but we are not a challenge to be defeated. We are a force to be endured, and you cannot endure us, because we will keep coming. Generation after generation, ship after ship, we will keep coming until we reach every star in the sky." Voreth stared at her. His hands were shaking, not with fear of death, not with anger at their defiance. He was shaking because he believed her. He looked at these two humans, old and tired and near death, and he saw the future. He saw ships crossing the maw. He saw humans spreading through the galaxy like water spreading through cracks in stone. He saw an empire of trillions of stubborn, hopeful, unstoppable beings. and he knew in his heart that the sovereignty could not stop them. "You will die here," Voreth said. His voice was quiet. "Yes," Hansu agreed. "We will die, but we will not be the last. The message is sent. Earth knows we are here, and humans do not forget. Humans do not give up. Humans do not stop." He smiled, and there was peace in his eyes. "You may kill us, Admiral, but you cannot kill what we started." Voreth stood in silence for a long time. The guards waited for his command. The scientists watched with wide eyes. The whole hangar was frozen in that moment. Finally, Voreth spoke. "Take them away," he said. "The execution will proceed as scheduled." The guards moved forward. Hansu and Yuna did not resist. They walked calmly between the soldiers, their heads held high. At the door, Hansu paused and looked back. "Thank you for letting us see our ship, Admiral," he said. "It was kind of you." Then they were gone. Voreth stood alone in the hangar, staring at the crude metal ship from a distant world. He thought about the message racing through space. He thought about the billions of humans on a planet called Earth. He thought about the future. For 3,000 years, the sovereignty had believed they were the masters of the galaxy. They had believed nothing could challenge them. They had believed their power was eternal. But now Voreth understood the truth. Power was not eternal. Empires rose and fell. The only thing that lasted was the will to continue, the will to endure, the will to never give up. And these humans had that will in ways he could barely comprehend. He gave the order to destroy Genesis VII. The ship was burned to ash and scattered into space. The humans were executed as the Council commanded. Their bodies were disposed of according to protocol. But the message could not be destroyed. It raced through the void at the speed of light, carrying 4 simple words to a distant blue planet. 4 words that would change the history of the galaxy. "We made it, come find us." 43 years later, the sensors at the edge of sovereignty space detected a new signal. Then another. Then dozens. They came from beyond the maw, moving through normal space at impossible speeds. Small ships, crude ships, ships that looked exactly like Genesis VII. And inside each one, there were humans. Admiral Voreth had died long before that day, but his warnings lived on in the classified files of the High Council. His words were read by a new generation of leaders who stared at their sensor screens with growing fear. "They will keep coming," Voreth had written, "generation after generation, ship after ship. You cannot stop them, you can only watch." The council debated, they argued, they planned and threatened and raged. But in the end, they could only watch. Because the humans did not stop. They never stopped. And in the great darkness between stars, a new dawn was beginning.